All right. So the other day we started off with 3 psych perspectives. We took a look at Wundt's. What was the psych perspective that I wanted you to attach to Wundt? Introspection, right? And what was wrong with introspection, Jason? It was too what?
Subjective.
It was too subjective, right? When you responded to a particular stimulus, it wouldn't be necessarily the same as the next person. Again, he was trying to capture cognitions, right? Then we had Titchener. What psych perspective did I want you to attach with Titchener? Then he's the first guy that brought, what is it? Structuralism, right? And there's a connection between, I want you to make a connection between structuralism and chemistry, the periodic table, this plus this equals this with cognitions, okay? And then the third perspective was with William James, or Bill James. What was his perspective? Functionalism, right? We're not looking so much about cognitive processes, we're looking about how our outward functions, like emotions, that are based upon adapting to one's environment. Okay, so we're going to get 2 more today. We're going to start with this one of my favorites, behaviorism. There are 2 psychologists that you need to be familiar with associated with behaviorism. The first one is John B. Watson, and I think I've referenced him before. And the other one is B.F. Skinner. And we'll try to differentiate them here in just a little bit. Okay? B.F. Skinner, I think he's still alive. He's getting pretty old. He's going to show up in one of our articles that we're going to read here in a week or so about how the brain changes over the course of one's life. But B.F. Skinner is considered to be one of the greatest thinkers of the 20th century. Okay? And we'll get to him again here in a second. We'll start with John B. Watson. John B. Watson is given credit of creating, like to use that terminology with Watson. He created behaviorism. Okay? And with the notes here, it says behaviorism is the science of behavior. It's observable, it's measurable, it's objective. Objective is what goes in the blank. So Watson's looking at Wundt and structuralism and introspection, and he's saying that stuff is way too subjective. You know, trying to figure out all the cognitive processes that are going on. We can't see it. We can't measure it. You know, we should stay away from that stuff, right? It's way too subjective. What we can measure and observe is people's outward behavior. Sound good? We can see it, we can measure it. It is objective. So this is where we get the change in the definition of psychology. It's no longer the study of mental processes or the study of behavior and mental processes. It just becomes, because of Watson, the study of behavior. Sound good? So the definition changes. And it becomes fairly popular. Alright, so there's John B. Watson. And this is one of the early experiments that he is known for. The concept that he popularized is a concept called emotional conditioning. You want to write that down next to Watson. Emotional conditioning. What he wanted to show and demonstrate was how environment can dictate and control one's emotions. I think I shared this with you before, but he made a quote. He said that you can give me any child that you want, and I can make them into anything that you want. I can make them into an athlete, a doctor, a lawyer, mathematician, or I can go the opposite direction. I can make them into a bum. Okay, and he was, fairly egotistical, overconfident with that. But what he was stressing was, all I need to do is put the child in a particular environment, and that's going to determine the outcome of that child's life. Sound good? So he came up with this small experiment to demonstrate the ideas behind that particular statement. And the most common one is with a boy named Albert. Little Albert is what it's called. Okay? So initially, it's not exactly this image. This is actually Peter and a rabbit, but that one's a little bit later. I'll get to that one here in a second. But little Albert was not initially afraid of rats. Right? Specifically like white rats. Okay? So what Watson wanted to do was to condition him to be fearful of those rats. And so he brought in a piece of sheet metal and a hammer, and then present Albert with a rat, bam, slam that together behind his head. Now he's a little kid, right? Rat, boom, over and over again, right? Eventually, all he has to do is present the rat to little Albert. What's he going to do? He's going to display a frightened stance and start to cry because that's been parroted over and over and over again. Okay? Now, what Watson didn't anticipate was this process and concept called generalization. You may write that down as well. It's associated with classical conditioning. What generalization is where you have characteristics associated with, in this case, a negative stimulus, the rat. It becomes generalized to all other stimuli that have similar characteristics. So, for example, the rat was white, so now little Albert becomes fearful of anything that's white. Watson's lab coat, Santa Claus's beard, anything that's white. Okay? He has a negative emotional reaction to it. Okay? So the plan was for Watson to recondition Albert and help him to overcome his fears and to demonstrate, that environment dictates emotions and behavior. However, Watson allowed little Albert went off and was not reconditioned. There was no debriefing, and so the assumption is that the child has some issues later on in life, right? Because so a lot of unethical stuff going on here as a result of it. Watson gets another boy, and his name is Peter. Peter was initially afraid of rabbits, and he wanted to show that he could help Peter overcome them. And so he would bring the rabbits in, and then he would pair the rabbit up with positive reinforcers, right? Good things, like family members, so that they would be there to comfort him, right? Or like candy. So here's the rabbit, here's candy. Here's the rabbit, here's candy. Okay? So eventually, Peter's like, every time I see the rabbit, I get something that's good. Right? So he's able to overcome his fear. So through that process, those experiments, Watson was able to demonstrate how environment does shape some of our emotions that way. Okay? So again, just think about Watson with those two experiments, little Albert and the rat, and Peter and the rabbit, and think about how he created, this idea of behaviorism. So he was the first, and then you get like the 1950s, 1960s, this guy comes along, B.F. Skinner, and he really takes this concept of behaviorism and then just really expands upon it, okay? So he comes up with this concept called operant conditioning, O-P-E-R-A-N-T, operant conditioning. And what operant conditioning is all about, it's all about reinforcers. There's positive reinforcement, there's negative reinforcement, and then punishment, positive punishment, and negative punishment. Okay? Reinforcers increase behavior, and punishment decreases behavior. Okay? He did a lot of work with mice in a box called Skinner's box, and we'll get to that here in a second. I'll show you the image. Behaviorism as a whole between Watson and Skinner says that behavior is determined by factors in the environment. No need to study the mind. Let's study the environment that causes the behavior. It eventually gets to the point where it's saying that us as human beings, we really lack free will, and we're really just complex organisms that respond to stimuli inside of our environment. Sound good? Responding to stimuli in our environment. So, while you're writing that down, I'll share with you a little bit about operant conditioning for a second, and my initial thoughts on operant conditioning. So, it's all about reinforcement, right? Having a reward at the end of the behavior. So you do something and then you get a reward, right? So I want you to think about right now, why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you taking notes? I mean, I asked you to do it, but a lot of times there's another reason why you're taking notes. So you can remember it, right? I really appreciate that response. Right? However, a lot of students don't necessarily write down notes necessarily because, well, I guess you can say, why do you need to remember it for the test, right? What is it about the test that you're really concerned about? The grade, right? So the grade is the reinforcer here. We do it for the grade. If there was no grade, would we necessarily do it? Right? That's kind of the question. exemplified in, say, for example, an assignment that a teacher gives, and then what does that student, that everybody's thinking it, but there's some student that says what? Is it's homework, and are you going to take a grade on it, right? Everybody wants to know that, because if the teacher's not going to take a grade on it, then the idea is I'm not going to do it, right? So that shows you behaviorism. Okay, and from my perspective, why does that happen? Well, it starts because we've created this culture, this environment of extrinsic motivators using the concepts of behaviorism. Okay, and it starts at kindergarten, right? Actually, it probably starts even before that in preschool. But anyway, what you get, you don't necessarily get a grade in kindergarten, but when you do something nice, something good, or you complete the worksheet, what does the teacher give you? Yeah, a gold star. Right? And so some psychologists and other, creative people, they call this the gold star syndrome. Right? We initiate young people into our educational system by using gold stars to manipulate their behavior. Right? And again, over the course of many years, what does this do? That makes us extrinsically motivated inside the classroom. So no longer do we, get excited about going to school because we get an opportunity to learn something new about the world in which we live, right? We're not intrinsically motivated. We don't have a desire to learn. It's all, I go to school because I got to get the grade, right? And that's the way, if I don't get a grade or I don't have something on the other end of it, I'm not going to feel it, right? So the consequence of that is we miss out on a lot of things. And sometimes, I approach this in a little bit of a harsh manner, but the reason why I approach it that particular way is because it's hypocritical for me to approach it that way, I guess, because I was in the same spot you guys were. If I didn't get a grade for it, I wouldn't do it, right? Why did I do what I did when I was in high school? To get the grade, to get the scholarship, to go to college, then get it done there, and then get the degree so I can get the job, right? It's all about reinforcements. So over the course of that process, I missed out on a heck of a lot of stuff that would be beneficial to me, right? I only did what I had to do to get the grade. If I'm intrinsically motivated, then I'm going to pick up on a lot more stuff than I normally would if I was just extrinsically motivated. All right, so this is a very basic experiment talking about reinforcement that Skinner used to demonstrate how a particular stimulus, in this particular case, it would be a chip, will manipulate the pigeon's behavior. So Skinner put together, so it's out of its reach, right? So the pigeon's behavior has to change in order for it to get the chip, the reinforcement. He puts into the environment an object that, that didn't work that time. Maybe if I walk away and walk back again, maybe it'll work. This work. So, try that maybe this time. Alright, so you can see that it's trial and error learning, and then we're working on trying to get a good consequence, right? A positive consequence as a result of the behavior there. Okay? So again, I use the example of the gold star syndrome, but we use it all the time. Parenting, a lot of parenting techniques is really contingent upon the ideas of B.F. Skinner and operant conditioning. Trying to hold a reward over your child's head for good behavior, or taking away chores, that's a reward. Well, that's negative reinforcement. That's good stuff there. So we see it all the time. Skinner actually wrote a book, a novel, called Walden 2. So it's a made-up fictional story. But what it's about, it's a utopian society. And what makes it a utopian society? The people inside of this community, they use his ideas of operant conditioning, and that's what makes it perfect. Okay, so he's trying to promote his ideas. He wrote another book called Beyond Freedom and Dignity, and that goes along with this concept. He was a big advocate for communicating that we have no free will, and so people would come up to him and say, "Hey, what about this scenario? How do you explain that we don't have free will in this context?" And so he chose about like 7 of those that were most common, and he wrote a book about how we don't have free will in those 7 scenarios. Okay, which was kind of interesting. Skinner's box. All right, so this is another apparatus that he created, that he demonstrated that he could get mice to understand this concept of reinforcement and operant conditioning. Okay, with this box, the way it's made, you can see the bars of the box. It's got an electrified floor. You can use this and punish the rat for doing the wrong thing. Okay, it's got a bar on the side where you can push this or lever, and it will reinforce. Food pellet will come down through the chute here. Okay, now there's also lights here on the wall, and what he would do is when the green light would go on, if the rat pushed the lever, then it would be reinforced. If the red light came on and then he pushed the lever, he'd be shocked that way. So over the course of time, through trial and error, the rat figured out only push the lever whenever the green light was on. If you just walked up to this and you just saw this rat, you're like, man, that rat's a genius. Right? But the reality is trial and error learning. Over the course of time, the rat can be conditioned to push the lever there. He also demonstrated this idea of operant conditioning with pigeons playing ping pong. He conditioned them to play ping pong.
The 2 pigeons are at either end of a small ping pong table. One pigeon pecks the ball as it comes toward him and knocks it toward the other pigeon. The other pigeon pecks the ball back across the table. If it goes past one pigeon, the other pigeon can eat, and if it goes the other way, the other pigeon eats. So it's a real game. The pigeon is reinforced for a cross-court shot if that is what gets the ball past his opponent.
So he also conditioned pigeons to bowl as well. Those are pretty fascinating things that he was doing with pigeons and with mice. And again, all those things demonstrated the ideas and concept of behaviorism and operant conditioning there. Okay? All right, moving on from behaviorism, we have psychoanalysis. So this will be the 3rd psychologist today. We have Freud, right? Freud was mentioned in your video yesterday. He died of cancer, right? Because of his consumption of chewing on cigars. Okay? The idea of psychoanalysis is really all about trying to figure out how to tap into one's unconscious mind. And we use the metaphor, he popularized the metaphor analogy of an iceberg, that our mind is like an iceberg. What we see is an iceberg, and we think, man, that's huge. We think our mind is really huge, but according to the theory, it's just the tip of the iceberg. Our mind is actually much, much bigger, and it's down here. And so since this is so much bigger, Freud says, let's tap into this section. Let's try to figure out what's going on here, and then we can better understand what's going on here. Ms. Farron?
So there's obviously different types of psychology that we'll learn about, but which one is right? Like, is there a right one, or are they all theories that, or I don't know?
So the way that we're looking at it right now is we're going through like a historical progression, almost in chronological order. So you can nix introspection, right? You can nix structuralism, get those out of the way. Functionalism, there's still aspects of that's used. There's still aspects of behaviorism, is still popular today, and there's still aspects of psychoanalysis that are there. Psychoanalysis has diminished a little bit. Okay, so tomorrow, or actually Friday, we'll get to this concept of eclecticism. Which one is right? It's not exactly the way psychologists approach it so much today. Right? Some of them will specify and specialize in one particular approach, but most of them what they do is they take a little bit of this and a little bit of this and a little bit of this, right? When they analyze human behavior. That's a good, very good question. All right, so what does psychoanalysis look like? There was a commercial a couple years ago, a Geico commercial that kind of humorously depicted what it looked like.
Switching to Geico really saves you 15% or more on car insurance. Does a former drill sergeant make a terrible therapist?
And that's why yellow makes me sad, I think.
That's interesting. You know what makes me sad? You do! Maybe we should chug on over to Mamby-Pamby land, where maybe we can find some self-confidence for you, you jackwagon! Tissue.
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more.
Okay, so this guy's a little bit harsh, but I just want you to think about the environment of what's going on, okay? So this is the typical psychoanalysis environment. You have the psychologist over on the side, and he's got his clipboard in hand, and you've got the subject over here on this side, and he's sitting in a comfortable position. You got questions, and then answers going back and forth. And this guy, what he's writing down, he's not writing down the answers, like the on-the-surface answers. What he's doing is he's writing down the answers that he thinks are coming out from the unconscious mind. So defense mechanisms or aspects that are fixations that have come up through the psychosexual stages of development. All right. So these things that come from the unconscious mind is what he's writing down. Sound good? So again, we talked about the iceberg. Psychoanalysis says you're controlled by your unconscious impulses. So behaviorism, you're controlled by stimuli in your environment. Psychoanalysis, controlled by your unconscious impulses. So we need to study what's below the surface, right? You have conflict between your conscious and unconscious mental processes. Our unconscious mental processes are constantly trying to dictate what we do. However, they're really, really selfish, and so we continue to try to push those things down. And then, like I said with Ms. Farrell's question, it has recently diminished. I say that it's recently diminished, but you know, people that study it, you know, if you're in the medical profession, they usually talk about, you know, go through aspects of psychology as well, and so we still have a tendency to make references to it quite often that way.
Isn't this really subjective though, because it's every psychologist's interpretation of what the person is saying?
Right. So there is a subjective component to it, and you know, can we really measure what's going on and see what's going on in one's unconscious mind? No. And so in a way that actually kind of contributed to the longevity of it, since nobody could come up with something that would argue against it, right? It was able to last a little bit longer than everything else, okay? So that's a very good point there, okay? So there are three ways. So how do we tap into our unconscious mind? Three ways. One is psychoanalysis, right? The second one is dream interpretation, right? Freud was big into dream interpretation, wrote a couple books on it, okay? You know, there are some common themes associated with dreams. One of them is like you're being chased down, right, by someone. Another one is like where you forgot to get completely dressed and you know, go to a public setting, so you're not wearing all your clothes. And then another one, I had another good one this morning. Any other? Falling dreams, right? Like you're falling, okay? So I'll share one common interpretation Freud would come up with use the one where you're not fully dressed in front of people in a public setting. What he would say there is that you're not actually worried about doing that, right? Essentially, everybody, you know, that's not going to happen, right? What he says is that you have something that you're worried about other people finding out about, right? That you want to keep hidden from everybody else, and you're worried about being exposed. That concept being exposed, right? For example, like you said something, you know, mean about somebody, right? And now you're worried that other people are going to find out that you said that, and you don't want people to find out that you said that. Sound good? So you have that dream, okay? And that would be how your unconscious mind kind of spins things, okay? So there are common dreams, and then there are just some really random stuff that goes on with your dreams, right? And there's a lot of people out there that will try to take objects that are in your dreams and say that that means this, or that means yada yada yada, right? But a lot of times it's really subjective, because what that object means to you is going to be completely different from what it means to the next person, based upon their experiences, okay? For example, last night I had a dream about a conversation between me and my dad, and we were talking about salaries, right? Not very many people are going to have that dream. All right, so Freud is big in personality, right? Personality. And so when he has his personality theory is based upon these three concepts here: id, ego, and superego. So I want to familiarize yourself with those three terms. The best way to explain that is for you to think about cartoons. There's situations in cartoons where the main character of the cartoon gets in a predicament, and then the cartoon like pauses for a moment, and then what pops out on the shoulders of the cartoon character? An angel and a devil, right? So I want you to think about that scenario. So the devil that pops out on one shoulder, what does that devil say? Yeah, do it, right? Whatever it is, do it. Yeah, they deserve it if it's like revenge type of stuff, or it'll feel good, right, if you do it. So that's the id up there. So you may write devil next to id. And then what's the angel say on the other side? Yeah. You need to be kind. You need to be kind. There are rules to follow, right? So that's the superego on the other side, and then you in the middle that has to make the decision is the ego. Sound good? You have to. The ego's job is to come up with a decision that satisfies both the needs of the id and the needs of the superego. Okay. Now, one thing I want you to keep in mind is we develop these over the course of our life. The ego and superego, they're not there at birth. The only one that's present at birth is the id. So if you think about a child, how selfish are they? They're extremely selfish, right? They can't think of anything else. They're not capable of thinking about anything else. The id is it, okay? So they do some really random things sometimes, okay? I'll give you an example. I got two boys, Preston and Duke, okay? We were at a dinner one time, and they had plastic utensils for us, spoons and forks and stuff. And Preston picked up a fork, and he just came over to Duke, who was sitting at the table, and just started jamming it into his arm, right? And I was like, what's going on here, That's kind of crazy. I was like, and he wanted to see what would happen. He wanted to see what would happen. And that's his id coming out, like operating, getting the best of it there. He doesn't know the rules, right? They're not established yet, but that's not what you do, okay? Ms. Barron?
So does Freud think that everyone has all three of those characteristics? Because what about people who murder or rape? Do they not have a superego at all, or does that superego not come out?
Right. So you get to the superego side of things, and in sociology, we really incorporate the social influences with the development of one's superego. So you're going to acquire that over the course of your life, and what is going to really dictate that development at a young age is your parents. Your parents are going to help you develop that superego to learn what is right and what is wrong. Sound good? Later on, it's going to be like your educators, other people in authoritative position, and then when you get to your age, a lot of times it becomes somewhat influenced by your peers, right? Are going to influence the development of your superego, okay? So again, for somebody that's a mass murderer, right? With Freud's perspective, he would say that, well, superego isn't fully developed, right? So there's nothing keeping the id from doing what it needs to do. So I told the other class, I said that, if you continue to let your id, make all the decisions, you're likely to end up in prison, right? Because the reality is, the id has extreme selfish desires. It's like violations of social norms, right? Things that are just perverse, right? And we continuously try to push those things down. Yeah.
Would it be different for someone with a split personality disorder?
You mean, so Freud would say that the personality disorder is a result of conflict between these right here. Yep. I've got other things to say before we finish up concerning psychoanalysis. I don't want to move on to humanistic psychology today. All right. Sometimes there's a struggle to make decisions between the id and the superego. So what the ego comes up with is defense mechanisms. Right? I'm going to share with you 3 types of. There's about 9 to 12 defense mechanisms altogether, but I want to just give 3 of them to you. Okay. The first one is rationalization. Rationalization. What rationalization is? It's socially acceptable excuses, socially acceptable explanations for things. Okay? The purpose of defense mechanisms for the ego is to save one's self-esteem. Okay? So give me some explanations for why somebody would fail a test. It's worded differently. The questions are. The teacher was better. All right, the teacher's back. All right, now I want you to think about you are in a conversation with your peers here, right? And you come up with this explanation, and the questions are just worded really differently. And then what's the response of your peers? How do they react? They just go off on you and say, "You're crazy, right? It doesn't matter how they're worded. You're just not very smart." Do they do that? No. They say, the words are, it's worded differently. And what do they say? Yeah, I understand. It's tough, right? And what did you say over here?
So his teacher was.
Yeah, the teacher didn't do a very good job teaching. And then what does the peer say?
Yeah.
Exactly what she said, or what you're saying, right? So anytime you get a scenario where the person that they're talking is, I understand, that's rationalization, right? A socially acceptable excuse for what's going on there. Because if you're completely honest with yourself, and you failed that test, and you actually had to say to yourself, I'm just not very smart, what would happen to your self-esteem? It would be crushed, okay? Another defense mechanism is that the ego uses is denial. Addicts have a tendency to use denial quite a bit. So use the example of an alcoholic. An alcoholic that's using denial will say, I'm just a social drinker, right? I'm not an alcoholic. I can control, the decisions that I'm making here. If they were completely honest with themselves, they had to admit that they're an alcoholic, what would happen to their self-esteem? It would be crushed, right? So they deny it, okay? Another one would be, my favorite, is projection. Projection is where you, as an individual, will take your deficiencies and you will project them out onto other people around you. Okay? Because if other people around you have the similar deficiencies as you do, then it's not that bad, right? So, for example, if you say that that person over there has a real problem with gossiping and they can't just, they can't keep it to themselves, right? And you do that over and over again. The reality is you have issues with gossiping, right? Because you're trying to place the blame on others. A great example of this is cheating, okay? And a relationship, a lot of times it happens to guys towards the girls. If a guy is ever accusing his girlfriend of cheating on him, what's probably happening? He's cheating on her, right? And the way this is working is he's cheating on her, and to justify his bad behavior, he accuses her of cheating on him, right? To make it all right for him, right? Otherwise, if he really reflects on what he's doing, he'd be crushed because he knows he's a bad person that way. Okay? It happens in sports and board games. Somebody's cheating with the score, and they accuse other people of cheating. They're probably the ones that are cheating themselves. Right? I saw this happen with Preston and Duke a couple years ago. It was Christmas time, and Preston heard about this idea of coal in your stockings and stuff. And so he said, Duke's not gonna get anything this year. He's just gonna get a stocking full of rocks, coal, and he's like, he's been awful this whole year. Duke's like, at the time, less than a year old. And Preston, what he's doing is projecting his negative characteristics, his qualities. You know, he's gotten in trouble a little bit over the past couple days, and he's worried that he's gonna get so he projects it onto Duke there in that particular case. Okay. All right. There are psychosexual stages that I'd like to go through, but we don't have time today. Associated with Freud and personality development, but we'll take a day at the end of the semester, and we'll really look into those and get a better understanding of psychoanalysis there. You got a general idea though.